So if we accept that premise and we sort of think about the business of commercial drones, we could also take the same lens and sort of like talk and think about what business is commercial drones in. And obviously drones has got a lot of hardware, a lot of kits involved, a lot of different types of specialized equipment, whether it's drones, cameras, all sorts of other payloads. There's also a lot of software involved. As we know, you use software to capture, process, analyze data. There's insurance software. There's all sorts of different platforms out there. And then obviously there's the services to actually provide the service with the hardware and the software to be able to provide an end output to the clients. And finally, there's logistics. So, there's a lot of talk about drones being used for delivery, being used for moving payloads in the future. And I think all of these different things are definitely components of the commercial drone industry. But the key question is, do they represent the heart of the industry or not? And so from my perspective, actually, drones are fundamentally a data business. So even though the industry has hardware, software, services, and logistics, drones predominantly represent a data business. So the data is the product. That's really what allows you to generate value in this industry. And I also say this because the business is essentially something that thrives when it can create and retain a lot of value. So before we go any further into this, I think I'd love to put forward another question in the chat. So we'll just put up a poll, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that poll. So you should be able to see a poll on your screen soon. So we'll give it about 30 seconds for people to answer this question. Right, we've got 20% of the responses so far, 50%. We're waiting for 4 more responses. Okay, got 20% of the responses remaining. Right, waiting for 1 more response. Do you want to have a stab at this question? Right. Okay, I think probably going to end it there. Okay, so that's really interesting because I think, so according to the polls, 78% of the audience today would rather give up aeroplanes than internet search. So it seems like search is extremely valued compared to aeroplanes. And so this sort of like actually brings me to my next point, which is to do with businesses called Google and Boeing. So I think you can look at Boeing and Google and you can try to understand which one of those makes a great business. So I think from this particular audience, it seems like people would rather give up planes rather than internet search. But I wonder whether people would want to sort of, in a non-pandemic world, whether that's the answer would be the same, whether we would value internet search just as much as aeroplanes. And so essentially the point here is that you can take businesses like Boeing and Google and you can plot them on 2 axes. So one axis being the value created and another axis being the value retained. And Boeing generates a lot of value in the world because it allows people to move from point A to point B. And I think that without that, I wonder if you would be able to have something like Google, because not having planes were a predecessor to Google. And in some sense, Google's is dependent on Boeing doing really well. So from my perspective, I think Boeing generates a lot of value, but it doesn't capture enough value that it generates. And that's because Boeing doesn't actually operate the planes. It only produces those planes, whereas Google is able to provide internet search, but then also provide ads on top of that as a business model to be able to retain the value that it generates. So and it can be really interesting to think of businesses from these 2 perspectives. You ideally want to generate a lot of value, but you also want to retain a lot of the value. So what has this got to do with drones? I think the same question can be asked in the drone industry. We can sort of say, where does the value lie in the drone industry? You know, you can take 3 different examples of a commercial drone job. So you can sort of talk about supermarket, large supermarket roof wants to do roof repairs, and they want to essentially have a service whereby the roof needs to be inspected. The main question there is where is the value essentially? Is it the service? Is it the hardware? And in fact, it's the roof data that the supermarket is really interested in, and drones is just a platform to deliver that data. You can look at an architect that wants to do elevation modeling. We can ask the same question: where is the value? And once again, the value is very much in the elevation data. So they don't really care where that data comes from. They really just want to have that sort of quality data. And the same thing for an energy company that wants to inspect its solar farms. They want to understand the condition of those farms, and they want to be able to do repeat inspections. They want to be able to understand that condition of the assets, and they want to move towards a future of predictive maintenance. So essentially the data once again is in the solar panel data. So if we accept the premise that actually in a drone business the value very much lies in the data, then how do we maximize the value that's generated and retained? So going back to the Boeing versus Google example, how do we make sure that our drone businesses, services, drone teams are very much generating a lot of value, but also retaining a lot of that value? And I think from my perspective, a lot of this really boils down to data quality, because yes, you can generate a lot of value using drones, but to be able to retain that value, you need to sort of make sure that that customer or client keeps coming back to you for repeat jobs, keeps coming back to you for more work. And I think retention of that value really just boils down to being able to deliver the right quality needed for that specific job. So if we sort of say, well, drone data is the way to generate a lot of value, and then quality data is the way to retain that value, how do we even define high quality data? And I think the industry has come to the point, matured enough to the point that we can start thinking about quality definitions. I think that gone are the days when, you know, you just fly the mission and you capture some data and then you process it and you just look at it from a naked eye perspective and sort of see whether or not the data is high quality. I think we've come to the point where we can think about things like quality definitions, and quality definitions could be very custom. They could be very sort of dependent on the business you are in. But essentially it needs to look at a few different parameters. It needs to look at the data and analyze it from many different parameters. So some of the parameters that I've mentioned here are coverage. Can the relevant asset or site be seen completely in the data set? Resolution, what details are available in the data set? How much further can you see? Is the data set structured? Can it be processed? What sort of structure does it hold in terms of overlap, in terms of the altitudes, in terms of angles? Image quality, are the images sharp and well exposed? Can each image be used individually? Does it form a good part of the entire data set? Usability, so can we use the data set easily, and can it be easily shared and consumed? Because sometimes you might have a data set that's too large for you to be able to actually view on a third-party computer or platform. Sometimes you might have a data set that is too low quality to be actually used. So I think usability is a key part of it as well. And finally, repeatability. Can we capture this data again? Because as I mentioned before, you don't want to sort of think of a drone job as a point solution. You want to sort of think about it as something that happens over and over again. And I think repeatability needs to be thought through in the quality of the data from day one. So assuming we go with that sort of a quality definition, I think one straightforward approach to coming up with a quality score based on the quality definition could be, you define all your metrics that are important to your specific data sets. You give them a score from 1 to 10 or any other scale you might prefer, and then you give them a weight. So you can say, well, that's for a specific data set, coverage is more important, whereas for a different data set, maybe the image quality is more important. So essentially a weighted average of all the scores attributed to the metrics could be one way of coming up with a total score for a data set. And then that way you can sort of really say whether one data set is better than the other. And the important thing here is also to make sure the customers understand this, because what you don't want is the customer didn't really understand what they're paying for and what they're sort of, or if it's not a customer, or if it's an internal team, if it's an internal stakeholder, if they don't understand high quality data, then it will be really hard for you to be able to communicate where the value's been generated. So looking at some examples, so essentially, if you think about a roof survey or a roof inspection, if one of our metrics was to sort of say that actually coverage is a really important thing, we can say that, we can see that there is a data set over here where images have been captured quite randomly and there isn't a proper sort of overlap between images, or a proper sort of coverage of the roof in the images on the left-hand side. Whereas on the right-hand side, if we look at the images on the map, you can see that this data set is near perfect in terms of what you might be able to see from this data set. Another example is, you could have images out of focus, and again, this would be typically attributed to a low quality data set, but it all depends on how you define the data set. So if it's only one image out of 1,000 different images that you have to collect, then maybe you're okay with the image being out of focus. But if it's a very detailed inspection and need every image to be in focus, then this will probably not be a high quality data set. So essentially, quality definitions and quality scores are really important. And I think sort of starting your drone survey with that in mind, and then having all different stakeholders, whether it's project manager, whether it's a chief drone pilot, whether it's the accountable manager, whether all of these different stakeholders need to be aligned in terms of what you're shooting for. And I think a quality definition really helps you get there, because everyone is making decisions with that quality definition in mind, and then all data is being captured and processed with that definition in mind, and it makes the whole process a lot more objective.